Rohan.
Cool. Okay. So I think, yeah, let me do a quick introduction and I'll just set out a little bit on the agenda and we'll try and keep this sort of as informal and interactive as possible. I've been on the other side of it. I hate sitting and being lectured at. So I really don't want to be the person who's doing that to everyone right now, especially in the middle of your midterms. So yeah, I am currently working at Stripe. I work on the money movement services part of it, which is something I wish I could tell you a lot about in extreme detail, but I just changed teams 2 weeks ago, so I'm still learning a lot of what it is. I was on a different team before that, but in a nutshell, basically what I'm currently now responsible for is the end-to-end API for Stripe to be sending money out. So for those of you who don't know, Stripe is a fintech company specifically focusing on payments, and we're expanding to be doing a lot more than payments. And in the expanding to do a lot more category, one of the things is for people being able to pay out their vendors, and that's the part of it that I'm essentially driving. And what that really means is if I'm Uber, I need to pay my drivers, or DoorDash needs to pay their delivery people, or any company who's integrated into Stripe, like if they've got anyone who needs to get paid, that is essentially the part that we're essentially, that layer is what we're managing. And this is sort of at a global scale. So um, you can think about startups and SMBs having to pay people who are doing services and work for them. But then you can also think about someone like a content creation platform, like say TikTok or Twitter, where they need to collect money and tips and subscriptions and all those things from users across the world. And then they also need to pay out their content creators across the world. And then this brings in a lot of sort of regulations and compliance and things that come with sort of cross country, cross currency complications, etc., etc. So in a nutshell, that's my day job. Outside of my day job, I do love to spend a lot of time doing producty stuff. So there's a few different sort of product clubs and things like that that I'm a part of. Enjoy speaking engagements. Talking to students is probably the most enjoyable part of this entire thing. So it's always been something I love doing. So I am super happy to be here. And with that, enough about me. Let's talk more about product. So just to set some context on what we'll spend some time on today, I'll talk a little bit just generally about the product lifecycle at a high level. I think some of this folks have already talked about in previous sessions, so I don't think I'll spend too much time going into each of them. I think what I do want to spend some time on is talking about what it means to actually deploy or launch a product and what happens after that. So that's probably going to be the meat of what I'll focus on when we talk about things today. And then just a couple of things I put together where we can do like an interactive activity, just have everyone participate, and then spend time just doing Q&A. Does that sound okay? Cool. Also, at any point, if anyone does have questions and stuff, again, keep it interactive. So just feel free to interrupt me, ask your questions, no problem. If there are things that you want to hold till the end, that's fine too, whatever you prefer. Okay. So when we're talking about the product life cycle, there you go. There's sort of four primary phases. And again, before we even get into that, I'll talk a lot about product generally today, but this is not a one size fits all definition. So when you're talking about products, you can think of literally consumer products, you can think of B2B SaaS products, you can talk about hardware products, software products, you can literally talk about your kitchen appliances, their products too. So in some way, shape, or form, this kind of extrapolates to most of these. But I'm going to kind of focus more on when I say product today, I'm specifically talking about software and typically either sort of consumer software or sorry, B2B SaaS as the sort of two buckets that kind of fall mostly into this. Some of this can be extrapolated outside, but I'll let you kind of figure out how that actually works. But typically, when you're talking about what the life cycle of any product is, and this could be a brand new product that has never been built and you're starting from zero, or it could be sort of additional products or features on top of existing platforms or products that already exist. So your four kind of primary phases are your discovery, deployment, development, deployment, and post-deployment. So I want to define what each of these mean and what actually we are trying to do with them, because there's a lot of ways you can think about each of these, but from the perspective of a product manager, from the perspective of someone who is sort of looking at this product lifecycle end to end, there's a couple of things I think which just sort of define what each of these phases mean. So when you talk about discovery, typically you can think of it as going and talking to customers and going and figuring out what you want to do and writing out your specs, etc., etc. There's a lot of what you can do. But there's one primary goal when you're talking about product discovery, and that is to go from ambiguity to clarity. And essentially, what that means is your job as a product manager in this discovery phase is to peel the layers of the onion. And like product sense is something that a lot of folks have probably heard of, and it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. That specifically is probably very, very critical when it comes to a discovery phase of a product. And like a good PM will go and ask 50 customers what they want, and then they'll stack rank what their asks are, and then they'll figure out the roadmap and do all of that. But a great PM is going to do something a little different, where they're going to go really deep and understand what is the root cause of the problem. And they're going to try and work to solve that. Like in your discovery phase, you shouldn't be trying to build a roadmap. You should be trying to define what the problem is. And I've probably spent, I don't know, close to maybe 1,000 hours in my career talking to customers. And in my early career, I used to make this mistake myself. I've learned since to not do that. But one of the very common pitfalls that happen in this phase is where you essentially make it a conversation about solutions. And discovery should never be a conversation about solutions. It should always really, really be focusing on the problem. So if there's like one takeaway that if you want to keep in mind from what you should be doing when you're doing a discovery phase of a product, it is specifically like focus on the problem. Like you have ambiguous problems, figure out how to get to clarity and define what the problem is. Now, that said, once you've gone to that, you have a problem, and then you get to a point where, okay, now I need to solve this problem. And there's sort of a lot of people who are going to be involved in this phase. So, like, typically, your engineering teams are going to be the key stakeholders you're working with when it comes to development of a solution. And your goal there is to go from problem to solution. Your tech leads, your engineers, they're going to be folks who are primarily going and actually doing the work over here. So, as a PM, what is it that you are doing? What is the product manager's real value when it comes to actual development? You're not really sitting and writing the code yourself. You're not actually shipping any of that code. What is it that you're doing? What is the value you're adding? So, there's sort of two dimensions to it. One is, and again, this comes down to again how different companies and teams define what PMs do. But one is there is some project management aspect to it. And that is almost sort of inevitable in some sense, but that should not be sort of the primary goal over there. Your goal is not to go and follow up on whether things are getting done on time and whether things are getting done under budget and all of that. But if you're a product manager, your specific goal when you're doing this problem to solution phase in development and the most value that you're going to add is make sure that all the work that's happening is with a customer focus and that you are keeping it in line with strategy. And what this means, and these sound like buzzwords that get thrown around a lot, but like what that really means, if you have to quantify it, is a lot of times once folks get into execution, we tend to lose sight of the forest for the trees. And we are trying really hard that, hey, we have this deadline and this milestone, and we need to meet that and do this, that, and the other. And that's all well and good. But a lot of times, what happens in that process is you forget what the actual customer problem is that you're trying to solve. So, as a product manager, a lot of times your teams are going to look towards you and ask for direction on, hey, we only have limited resources to build like three out of these five things. What is it that we should build? And sometimes logical grouping might suggest you do one, two, and three. But the lens you need to bring over there is, does this align with what the customer really wants? Is that the core pain point you're trying to solve? And then does this align with the strategy that you have for your product, for your company? So that's sort of the core value that you're bringing over there, being able to have that holistic picture and knowing what's going on outside of just that one team that is executing that one feature or that one product is specifically the value that you're going to bring over there. So I just wanted to touch like really briefly on these. I know those are not the two topics for today, so we won't deep dive too much into them. I just wanted to kind of touch at a high level on there. And then let's spend some time talking about the next two, which are the deployment and the post deployment. And I think I'll kind of go dive deeper into those. But generally speaking, the goal of your deployment phase is to take your customers' pain points that you're aware of and convert those into very, very strong gains for the users. And your post deployment is to go from something that is functional to something that is actually very delightful for your users. So let's kind of dive a little deeper into those. So when you're talking about product deployment, so there's a lot of different things that come along that journey. It's not just a one-time thing of, hey, I hit my Git commit or my Git push and I'm done. There is obviously significantly more that comes along with it. So I want to spend some time walking through what typically a deployment cycle looks like when you're talking about production environments and when you're talking about companies that are actually going to be deploying things to a user. So first one is the best one, the alpha release. This is called a lot of different things at different companies. Like at Stripe, for example, we call it internal live mode or internal testing, but that's basically what it is. You've built your product, you've got all your code ready, you've set everything up in a way. Now you want to make sure someone's actually using it. The quickest and easiest way of doing this is to give it to your own users. It's also typically you'll hear the term dog fooding. That is basically this. You're giving it to your internal employees at your own company or your sort of non-external stakeholders to try things out and give you feedback on this. And this is very, very critical because it really helps you identify issues very, very early and refine the product before any sort of paying customer or anyone with sort of an outside interest is really looking at it. And this is one of those things where I have seen in my own career, I have made this mistake myself. We've been always, there's always this thing on we're short on time and we need to get this to market really quickly, quickly, quickly. And everyone's always racing against your competitors. And this is the one that always ends up getting either cut down or people end up taking shortcuts here, or instead of spending 3 weeks doing this, let's spend 3 days doing this. And usually that turns out being a very, very bad idea because things that you could have caught internally end up being caught externally. And next thing you know, there's like a TechCrunch article about why your amazing launch was not really that amazing and why you missed this one obvious bug. So this is one phase that I think really deserves a lot of attention and a lot of focus, and it's worth planning out. And ironically, this is currently the phase I'm working on. In fact, just before this, the last 6 hours of my day have been kind of focused on an alpha release for a product that we're launching very soon. So once you've gone through that, you're talking about production readiness. So what this means is, are you able to scale? Do you have the right set of servers? Do you have the right databases? Are your networks reliable? Do you have your security settings set up? All of that comes with the difference between I'm testing this internally at my own company versus I'm actually going to send this out to users. So when you're talking about deployment, this is again a very critical stage. You're typically at larger companies, you have entire infrastructure teams whose job is to just do this. If you're at smaller companies, if you're looking at startups, obviously there's like three people who are doing all of this. They're also the database administrators and the security person and the developer and the ML engineer and like seven other things. But it is something that is very, very critical when you're launching anything out, which then brings you to now actually giving this in the hands of your first real users. So when you're talking about a beta release, there's a couple of sub phases in this. There's usually a private beta and your public beta is typically how most places are looking at this. I'm just going to quickly go over this. People know what beta phases are. You have a limited set of users who are using a limited functionality of your product. It is the goal over here is not really to make money and make revenue and create buzz. It's to get feedback. So whether you're doing a private beta with a hand selected number of users or you're opening it up to the public and letting people sign up for a beta, the goal is to actually go and find some of those bugs and fix it before you actually eventually go and release it out. I am guessing most people over here have used ChatGPT in the last few months. So in the first probably month or so when it came out, there was a sign up list. Even for Bing, there was a sign up list. They were opening the doors very, very slowly to beta users to begin with. And at that time, the goal was not to go and create this big buzz about I'm going to get 100 million users in 5 days or whatever. It was to actually find and iron out those bugs with a set of people who are typically early adopters of technology who are interested in going and helping find those bugs. So you're not going to have your enterprise customers typically as your beta users, but you will have people who are uh, usually your core scenario users who can be the most helpful in this. Now, one thing that comes when you do this is you can build out experiments. Like you get data points, you find out where, hey, I created a beta and I sent this out to like 15 different users. And I got three different options where like these five want this thing and these five want this thing and these five want this thing. Which way should I go? So this is a stage where it's not necessary to do it every single time, but it is something that does end up being helpful in many cases where you can run different experiments where A/B testing is a very typical one that people often use, but there's a lot of different ways you can run experiments on trying to figure out what is it that you actually want to do. In some cases, for consumer products, you might want to see what is the user experience like. Is it enhancing the performance? Are you getting a better conversion rate? Those are certain things which are usually very, very helpful when it comes to the experimentation stage. And the next two sort of go very much in tandem with your experiments, which is logging and monitoring. This is something that gets overlooked. It shouldn't ideally be overlooked because that is where you're going to actually figure out what your system is really doing. Um, if it's a consumer facing product, your users can tell you about the user experience. But beyond that, it is always critical to have logging and critical to have monitoring to know what your systems are doing. So, is your database about to fail? Are your networks operating the way you think they should? Is there any sort of API that isn't kind of returning what it should at the time it should? These are all things that you're going to typically be building. So, again, a lot of this is built by the engineers, but as a product manager, these are things that you will absolutely consume. So you're going to be taking these logs, you're going to be building monitors on top of them. And as a PM, it's your job to really be aware of every single piece that is moving in your service that you're trying to launch or in your product that you're trying to launch. Security is a big one, which in today's day and world, security and privacy are very, very important. You do not launch products that are not secure and that are not compliant. They will die. There is just no two ways. Even if it's a small private beta, it doesn't matter. Those are very, very critical things. And most companies have teams that are looking at this. It's always good to be familiar with it. Like sometimes question that I get asked is what are some things outside of my course textbooks that I should read? Just read up on what general security and compliance is in the world, because whether you like it or not, it is going to be a part of your life if you're building products. So it's always good. You don't have to go and be an expert at it, but it's good to at least know the terminology and the language. And then the last one is, again, it depends on the size and scale and the kind of product you're launching, but it's always good to have some kind of support mechanism. When you put something out there in the hand of the users, who are they going to come and tell that, hey, you just built such an awesome product that my life is amazing? Or, hey, this is absolute rubbish and this just doesn't work for me. I wish this did this. So having some kind of feedback mechanism is helpful. We'll talk a little more about it on the next slide, but just want to highlight that this is something that gets built before you launch it out. Now, there's one horizontal that I also want to call out that runs across all of these. And that is typically where there are certain things that are very important at every phase that you're going on over here. So your XFN basically means your cross-functional teams. Your cross-functional stakeholders are going to be your design teams, your marketing, your sales, your legal and compliance, etc., etc. One thing as a product manager that is an incredible skill to have and something that really, really helps you grow early on is being cognizant of who are these stakeholders cross-functionally and taking them along with you. Because a lot of times a very, very good way to fail is to not take your sales and marketing teams along with you, go build an entire product, and then finally go and tell them, hey, can I get your help and try to sell this? So yeah, I see a hand up. What's up?
Um, yeah, Rohan, so there's a question from someone.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Go ahead,
it
Seth.
says, yeah, it says about the alpha release that you just talked about. Did you ever work on a product that failed to go past the alpha release? And in such a situation, how does a PM handle it and go forward with the product?
Awesome. I'll hold that question. Let me answer it in a few minutes once I get through this slide. But it's a really good question. And the high level answer is yes, a bunch of products I've worked on have been shelved at alpha. But let me kind of go a little more into that just after we cover a couple of slides. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I think, yeah, let me kind of rush a little through this in the interest of time. But basically, I think the main one over here was that cross-functional is something as a product manager, especially early on, it will help you grow really, really well, knowing that you have other stakeholders outside of just engineering and making sure they're along for the ride. Customer feedback, we've already talked about. Documentation is something that is extremely important. It's one of those things where it's a very standard sort of running joke across PMs where it's supposed to be 5% of your job, but it's 95% of what you're going to be judged on is the kind of documentation you produce. So being able to write very, very good, clear, concise documents is a very, very important skill to have in your end product. Like the ability to convey what you're trying to say to your stakeholders in a crisp way in as few words as possible is something that will take you extremely far. So again, one thing that is worth really brushing up on if you're looking to get into product management is the ability to write. So Again, GTM is similar to what we talked about. That stands for go to market. This is primarily working with the set of people who are actually going to take your product and get it into the hands of users. Uh, so before we go to the next slide, now let me address that question on have I worked on a product that was killed in alpha? Yes, bunch of times. So at my previous job, especially, so I used to work at Microsoft before Stripe, and I was working in the security space. A lot of things that we did were experimental. So with security, there was always this standard thing where a running joke we had was the day people understand what we do for a living means we're not doing our job well. So when you're in the security space, one of the things that typically happens is most products that you build, most things that you build happen behind the scenes. They're not really things that are going to be in consumers' hands. They're typically things that are happening so like 6 layers below in the stack. That also means you're doing a lot of experimentation and it's a perpetually changing landscape. So one example of a product that got shelled when it came to alpha testing was we've all used OTP. Everyone is familiar with what two-factor auth looks like. And we ended up building an entire set of systems when we really wanted to use two-factor auth for it, obviously. And we decided, let's use SMS as the simple, easy way to go do this, at least in the beta. Let's start off with that. And it took our red team approximately 3 hours to completely break that. So it turns out text messages aren't very secure, and it's not really great if you're trying to sell this to multi-billion-dollar enterprise corporations who are typically Microsoft's customers. So like it was a quarter worth of work that entirely got shelled, and then we eventually moved on to hardware-based security devices for two-factor auth. And there's many of these where you have internal teams when they test things and turns out that, hey, okay, what you've built isn't exactly the best thing that you want to send out to your customers. Products do end up getting shelled very, very often. In fact, at any large company, more products actually get shelled than what actually make it out to the customer. So learnings that you get from these always end up making it to whatever is the next product that you build or the next iteration of it. So you typically just think of it as another iteration along the way. Does that answer the question or? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, so is it like you do a bunch of POCs before you actually work on a product,
Yes. So you do
and even the products
POC.
products after POCs you shelve them?
Yes. So POCs are the easiest. Before you actually write even your first line of code, you will typically build mocks, you will do POCs. A lot of things that get shelled do get shelled at that point. But at the end, there are certain things that need to be tested out in a production environment before you realize their feasibility or not. So sometimes things make it through POC, they get to alpha, sometimes they even get to beta, and you find out this isn't really the right product to build. Sometimes they go all the way. Like you have consistent examples of that. Like Amazon's Fire Phone is a great example of something that went through every single phase, eventually got launched to customers, and then completely died literally 2 months later. So there are always postmortems on what could have been done better, what should have been done better. But yeah, it's very, very common. And especially at large enterprises, products get killed along the way at different stages all the time. So yeah.
Got it. So regarding the alpha release thing, there's another question.
Mm-hmm.
So it says, hi Rohan, if it is a startup of 5 to 10 employees, how do you suggest alpha releases tested? So I think you can answer it better in a way like how you did it in Microsoft and how you did do it at Stripe because of
Sure.
this.
Yeah, I mean, Stripe has 9,000 employees now, so I don't know if it's a direct apples to apples, but I can still go with how, yeah, it's a very valid question. I think when you are a small startup, when you are a less than 100% startup, I'm going to put all of that into the same bucket. You are typically your own customer first. So you are going to be doing extensive dog fooding. You are not really going to be relying on a lot of external people. Sometimes what these startups will do is they'll actually bring in experts as consultants to come in and try doing alpha testing with them. So if, for example, you're building a security product, you will bring in like security consultants, or you'll bring in like an external red team to come and try and find gaps in your product. If you're doing a consumer facing product, you will not just test it internally with your own, but you'll actually, so not really customers, but someone who's paid to come and try out your product. So you sometimes outsource that alpha testing in some sense if you don't have the scale to do it internally. So that's typically how smaller companies do it. And not all of them do it. For a lot of, like for a 10% startup, you usually don't have the resources to do these things. So at that point, then it becomes a leap of faith where, hey, you know what? I'm going to have it out in the hands of users. It's not going to be a very extensive alpha test. I'm going to rely on the beta test to figure out what I need to do. So that's a trade-off that you need to make depending on how much resource you have to burn at the time.
All right.
Cool.
Do you want me to go for another question or?
Can we come back to questions? And also, I think
Okay.
going right, if folks want to kind of ask their questions, that's cool too. If you
Okay.
want them to route it through you, or if folks want to just turn on their cameras, ask their questions, that's cool too. But
Yeah,
maybe let's.
I'm
Yeah.
just reading out the questions from Slido. So
Okay.
there's a link in the chat if you want.
Oh, that'll be
Like,
helpful. Sorry, I
yeah,
seem to have completely missed that.
yeah. I remember you asking for Slido.
Yes.
So
Perfect. Okay, I have it open now. But yeah, let's come back to questions. Let me just go through one more thing, and then we can just spend some time doing questions. I promise I'll be quick. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what is post deployment. So typically, when people think about, hey, I've deployed it, so this means I've shipped my product and now it's time to celebrate. And I think those are very important things. A lot of companies overlook that. You shouldn't. It is absolutely essential to celebrate, acknowledge all the work that people have done, kind of make sure that stakeholders feel the value of the work they've done. But it doesn't kind of stop there. I think your product launch is just sort of the beginning of what your post deployment is essentially going to look like. And there's a bunch of things that happen after you've actually done your actual ship it, your first ship it. And I just want to quickly walk through them and we'll come back to questions. So I spend maybe like 2 or 3 minutes on this slide. Uh, Engage with your customer feedback. So we talked about gathering customer feedback. One thing that I've seen happens a lot is you have surveys and support tickets and social media tracking and all of these things, and you get a lot of feedback. And then that feedback all goes into this big black hole and nobody's really looking at it. That is one of the most sure short ways to make sure that your product doesn't survive beyond beta. Because if you have beta users or if you have early adopters, these are people who are taking a leap of faith on you. You are not a big established product at this point. These people are taking their time and effort to give you feedback. Make sure you respond to their feedback. Make sure you really, really take that feedback seriously. And especially as a product manager, it is extremely helpful for you to be very, very plugged in with the feedback, because a lot of times what that means is you can pick up the phone and call the person who gave you that feedback and actually talk to them and figure out what is their real problem. So being on top of feedback is something that is probably the most important thing you can do on of all the things on this slide. The next one is so the quantitative version of the previous one. Like feedback in a sense is qualitative. Now you're talking about metrics. This one I'm not going to harp on. I think it's self-explanatory. You have metrics, you define what your KPIs are, you track them, you build reports on top of them. A lot of times the metrics and reporting serve two purposes. One is they help you figure out the health of your product. They also help kind of make upper management feel a little better about what's going on. And that is, whether you like it or not, something that you always end up doing in this role. The make changes is another one which is interesting. So you've got a bunch of qualitative and quantitative feedback. Once you analyze that, what are you going to do about it? And there's two kind of schools of thought that you're going to be constantly encountering. One is every bit of feedback absolutely must be actioned. Like our users have given us feedback, we need to go and take all of that feedback. But that essentially is going to go down a very, very deep hole where you're only going to be solving feedback and you're not really going to build your product. So being able to prioritize what feedback is really valuable for the user and for your company is something that is a skill worth learning. And it's something, it takes some time, it takes some practice, it takes some experience. But the ability to prioritize is something that is very, very helpful at this stage. And like slight tangent over there, when we're talking about prioritization, what is typically thought of is some kind of stack rank of lists of, hey, these are all my top 10 priorities. It's a list and I'm going to work my way down that. And that is going to burn people very, very quickly. Ideal way I would suggest is, if you're prioritizing anything, and this is going beyond product, just draw cut lines. Like pick the top three things you want to do, just say no to everything else. uh, Simple example, I know this is being recorded, I'm probably going to get into trouble for saying this, but at my job the way I do it is I have three priorities for a week, and those are the only three things I work on. If I have time after that, I'll watch Netflix, YouTube, do whatever I want, take my dog out for a walk. I will not touch number four on the list. And that kind of keeps you focused, because the minute you say that I'll finish these first three and then I'm going to do everything else, you're just going to be all over the place and you're going to burn out very quickly. And you don't have laser focus on your top priorities if you do that. So when you're making changes, it's basically an exercise in prioritization. Experimentation we already talked about, so won't really harp too much on that. But I think the one thing I'm really trying to emphasize on this is we talked on the previous a couple of slides ago where the goal over here is to go to a delightful experience for your users. So once you launch your product, your primary goal there in that first launch is to be functionally efficient, to solve the problem. But beyond that, your job is to make sure that you're not just solving the problem, you're making it a delightful experience. And like probably the best example of a company that everybody here, I'm sure, has heard of, has done this is Airbnb. When Airbnb started off, when they were this tiny little startup pre-YC and at YC, they launched, I think, 17 times before they had their first customers. So they just launched and launched and launched and launched and launched. It was not, there was no one launch. So they kind of went through this loop 17 times before they finally felt that this is now a product I'm actually proud of and that I'm willing to go and get people to pay money for. So just something to keep in mind. Like this is most of the popular companies that you've heard of in the last 10 years have probably gone through this cycle many, many, many times before what they found what is PMF or product market fit. Okay. I'll take a pause here. We can do a couple of questions. I had a couple of activities or stuff, but maybe we can go into Slido for questions right now. Or if anyone has questions live, we can do that as well. Just pop your camera on. Feel free to ask. Slido it is. Okay. Let me go down the list. I see the top one here. What does documentation consist of? Is it BRD, SOWs, or more like creating backlogs in Jira and DevOps? Cool. Love this question. Okay. So there's a lot of misconceptions around what does documentation really mean. Let me answer the easy part of this. No, it's not about backlogs, Jira, and DevOps. That is not your job as a product manager. I'm just going to say it outright. At some companies, you might end up doing a part of it, some parts of it. At very small startups, obviously everybody wears multiple hats, but those are typically roles of program management and project management, which are very, very different from product management. When I talk about documentation as a product manager, there are three sort of big buckets of documents that you will typically be writing, and that should be your bread and butter that you're responsible for. The first one, and I'm going to work my way up over here. The first one over here is what is called a PRD, or the product requirements document. This is essentially defining what needs to get built. This is the output that comes after all those customer conversations that you've had and the feedback loops, etc., your market research, competitive analysis, all these 15 different activities that you've gone and done. That results in this one document called the PRD. Every single PM will spend a lot of their early career, especially writing PRDs. The consumers for your product requirement docs are typically all your stakeholders. It will be your engineering team, your marketing team, your sales team, etc., etc. But this document is defining what needs to get built. Now, the second part is your user-facing documents. So when you build a product, especially if you're building stuff, which is like if you're building software, if you're building things which are in B2B SaaS, if like me at a company like Stripe, your product is an API that is consumed by developers, your product is your document. Like that is a standard thing. We always say this at Stripe, that your product is only as good as the documents that come with it. This will include user guides. This will include actual documentation on how do I integrate my software with this. This is especially true when it comes to SaaS. So what is your user facing documentation? When you are building your product, what should the user know about your product? What are the different components they should know about it? What are the integrations they should know about it? How should they use it? How should they troubleshoot it? All of that is a very, very, very important part of the documentation that you will write. And then I said there's three. So there's the third one, which is something that you kind of start doing, and over time, as you grow in your career, as you grow sort of up the PM ladder, if you will, you'll be doing more and more of is your strategy documents. So knowing what your strategy actually looks like is really, really important because it keeps the entire organization working towards the same goal. I have worked on teams where we have not been very good at strategy. The downfall and the problem with doing that is now you have 7 different teams, each one's building their own thing, and each one is running towards a different finish line. So you end up with a set of features instead of a cohesive product. I don't want to start naming them, but everyone can think of dozens of products where there's 5 really cool features, but none of them make sense together. So yeah, that's the one main reason why, as a senior product manager, something that you really want to think about is what is your strategy, what is your vision. It sort of sets the understanding across your different teams on this is what the goalpost and finish line looks like, and that everyone wants to work towards. Any live questions? Okay, let's take a couple of minutes then before going back to questions. Let's do an exercise and try and wake everybody up. Uh, let's do an audience poll. So I think everyone has the like reactions on Zoom, right? Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand. I messed it up. Cool. Wait. Do you have the different reactions on Zoom? Sorry, not Zoom. I keep calling it Zoom. Teams, my bad. Wait, do you have like thumbs up and heart emojis and things like that? If so, can someone do a thumbs up?
Yeah, we do.
Cool. Okay. If that is true, then let's do this. I wanted to throw this question out to folks over here. What do you think is more important for a product to have? A large number of users or a small number of highly engaged users? And just sort of either do reactions in the chat or as reactions on the Teams call itself. And we can just kind of gauge what do people typically think? What is more important for a product to have? I see it depends on strategy. Cool. I'm not seeing reactions, so I don't know if they work or if I'm just not seeing them, but maybe someone can just help point out which one's
Yeah,
winning.
it was mostly a small number of highly engaged users. I did not see any. Yeah, one person did
Interesting.
a thumbs up.
Okay. Okay. Does anyone want to jump on and say why they think a small number of highly engaged users are more important than a large number of users? What's an example where that would be true? Like I can give you a straight up counter example. If you want to take any social media platform, will Facebook or Twitter or Instagram be successful if it had 1,000 really engaged users, or does it need a large number of users to really succeed?
Well, I
I,
actually think you need a large number of users instead
Okay.
of the highly engaged users, because
Mhm.
if you have a large number of users, you're going to get a good amount of feedback,
Mhm.
and that'll help you make your product better depending on what the feedback is. And
Okay.
you can also extend your user base and, help them try out the new features when you make those changes.
Mhm. That's a fair point. Uh, Let me flip the script then. Let's think of a product which is specifically, uh, let's say that I'm specializing in selling a set of services or a set of like heavy equipment. Let's talk about that. Like my products are all costing like $50 million. Now I'm not going to have a large number of users over here. So, and also, let's not even go that far. Let's say that I'm a startup. Someone mentioned a 10% startup as one of their examples. I'm a 10% startup. Where am I going to find a large number of users, right? Like, why would anybody want to use me? At that point, what actually helps? So, I think your point was very, very valid. Having a large number of users helps you get a lot of quantitative feedback. When you have a small number of engaged users, you're having qualitative feedback. Not one is not better than the other. I don't think you can do either without the other. It really depends, I guess, what is the product that you're building, whether you're looking for breadth or whether you're looking for depth, and what does product success really look like for you. And the way I like to think about this is typically there are pros and cons to both. If you're thinking of what a wide range of features look like and a large number of users are going to give you, you're essentially looking for something which is greater market appeal. Can you have a competitive advantage here? Are you going to get a lot of revenue if you have a large number of users? The social media example is a perfect one over here. But then it also gives you a flip side where if you're going down that route, it also makes things very difficult to prioritize. So suppose you have 100,000 users who are using your product and you're getting feedback from those many users. Now it becomes really, really hard to prioritize what you want to do and who you want to do it for, because everybody has an opinion. Everybody has some kind of feedback, whether they give it to you qualitatively or whether your metrics are giving it to you as quant. A large number of users also comes with that caveat where how do you prioritize what to do? How do you decide what needs to get done? It comes with its own sort of complexities and development cost. So I think I did see, I think was it Shashank mentioned in the chat where it depends on strategy. And yes, it does. It depends on your strategy. It depends on your product. It depends on what market segment you're trying to sort of tailor your product towards. So there isn't really a one size fits all. But this is a question you should always ask yourself before you're going into this launch post deployment phase on what kind of engagement am I looking for? Does my product require a large number of users giving me feedback to be successful? Or is it a niche product which a handful of users need to use? Um, Look at the Apple Watch. That's one example where you could say it is a large number of users, but a small number of highly engaged users is what really got it started. From there is where now they've found this big product market fit. And even then, you could argue it's a large number of users, but if you compare it to the number of people who wear watches, the number of people who wear Apple Watch is a very, very, very small number. So it just kind of really depends what is the product that you're building, what is it that you want. It's something to think about before you go ahead with your launch. Okay, one more quick one. What do you think is more important for a product, to have a wide range of features or to be highly specialized? And again, I'll need someone to just call out who's winning because somehow I'm not seeing the reactions.
It's equal number of reactions this time. So.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little about this one. I think it's equal is an interesting one. This one typically tends to be towards the highly specialized. Um, I'm personally biased towards the highly specialized part of it. So when you're starting and launching a product, your aim should be to solve a specific problem. And what users care about is how well are you solving the one problem that they really care about, that really matters to them. A lot of features tend to be nice to have and nice bells and whistles. Think about a very, very simple thing, right? Like, let's take Google. Everybody has used Google to search. The one thing that they are really, 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 really good at is giving you quick, accurate results. They have such a minimalistic page. Like you go there, it's a white screen with a search bar. That's it. There's no clutter, there's no additional funky features, none of that. Over time, they've added some of these things where you can do image search and document search, and there's a bunch of stuff that gets added on. But the core product experience is very, very simple. It solves one use case, which is I want the ability to find an answer to a question I have. That's it. And the wide range of features tend to get very, very cluttersome. Like a very good example of a company that I feel has been doing this very badly recently is Facebook. It started off great. It started off solving a set of problems, but now it's like Facebook has like these 300 different features that most people aren't even aware of. Nobody's even using Facebook. Like even my parents have stopped using Facebook. That's how clunky it's gotten, because you've got marketplace and you've got groups and you've got like 15 other things I don't even know about. Now they've started community chat, and people aren't even using communities. Who's going to be using community chat? So you can keep building features. It's always arguable that there is value to having certain features which are going to essentially maybe give you a competitive table stakes with someone else, and those kind of reasons why you would want to build them. But highly specializing in a small number of things that are being done really well typically tend to work well. You will always have exceptions to this rule. Once you grow beyond a certain scale, the Microsofts and the Googles and the Amazons of the world can afford to keep going and building a lot of features. They've already found product market fit. They might lose it, but that's a different conversation. But until you get to that point, if you're working on something that hasn't found that PMF yet, just focus on very, very small set of features that are going to be solving your user pain point. And I see Aishwarya, your hands up. You have a question or?
I think she did not put it
Yeah.
down the last time.
Instead of reaction, I by mistake raised the
No
hand.
problem. Cool. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here. Let's move this over to Q&A. I do want to make sure folks have time, and I somehow still ended up talking way too much. So let's make use of this time for Q&A. We can either go to Slido, but seriously, folks, if you want to ask live, go for it.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarang.
Yes, Anand.
You're on mute.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarang. So, first of all, thank you so much to the Broadbase team for getting hold of you. I've been unsuccessfully trying it on LinkedIn DMs and sliding into it, but I've not been able to do so. So, thank you
I'm
so much to
sorry,
the
I'm not
Broadbase
very
team
good
for
at
doing
keeping
that.
up with them.
Yeah, and then so I'm just a Potterhead just like you. And
Nice.
my most liked comment on LinkedIn is still the comment under your post on Potter. So, thank you so much for providing distribution for that.
Nice.
And just a small question related to that, so we have this habit of linking everything that we do to product management. So how has Harry Potter and the Seven Horcruxes helped you at getting better in product management?
Oh man, nice. Okay. Uh the easy answer here is it's really helped me build relations at work. Somehow a lot of people you work with in the tech industry, especially around PMs, seem to like Harry Potter for some reason. So the minute they find out when you're new on a team, like I was saying, I've just started on my new job 2 weeks ago on my new team. And in my intro, one thing that always gets sent out is that I'm a Potterhead. And turns out a bunch of people I work with are really into Harry Potter as well. It just breaks ice. I found that to be a really fun icebreaker, and somehow people just start getting into Potter debates very easily. So you end up breaking ice, and it doesn't matter what level people are, and those kind of it just breaks the ice easily. So that's one thing I've really found has helped in my PM career, where Harry Potter has just found a way to connect with people, I guess. Uh, on a PME side, especially since you asked about Horcruxes, and again, I apologize for those on the call who are not Potterheads and who have no idea what the hell we're talking about and what a Horcrux is. Uh, I don't really sympathize with you. You should go read Harry Potter, I guess. But I think the one great sort of takeaway over there is, at least for me, the end of all of it, where it comes down to the part where the last Horcrux is destroyed and Harry is at a point where, hey, I need to do the right thing over here, even if that means killing myself to do it. I'm not translating that directly into work spiel, but you can think of that as your products, where if it is right for the business to kill a feature, to kill a product, to essentially end something, even though it's something you have built, you could have put your blood, sweat, and tears into building something. But if it is not the right thing for the business, if it is not what aligns with the goal and the strategy, you should be willing to do that. And you shouldn't be regretful doing that. I think a lot of times we get emotionally attached to the products we build. One of the things I've learned is to actually decouple that. At this point, like, I love the products I build, but I really don't care if we decide tomorrow that, hey, we're not going to ship this, we're completely going to kill it. That's fine. If it's the right thing and you can convince me why it's the right thing, totally worth doing it.
Thank you. Thank you
Cool.
for providing the spoilers to the rest of the audience as well.
I mean, it's been 20 years. If people have not read Harry Potter at this point, they're not going to read it. So,
So thank you so much, Rohan. Have a good one.
sure. Yeah. Nitish, I see your hands up.
Hi, Rohit, 1 second.
Yeah. You are on mute.
Hi, Rohan. I'm audible now.
Yes, you are.
It was nice meeting you today. So I just wanted to add to that question of yours, which said, what is more important for a for a product, having a large user base or having a small user base. So I personally believe having a large number of users is important to get the visibility that a product requires. But at the same time, have a product, but also have small percent of the user group having regular engagement is also important to have the product to make the product successful. So that is what I wanted to add. And also, I have a small question to you, if I may ask,
Yeah,
if
go
I can
for
hold
it.
it. So what I wanted to ask was, how do you stay up to date on the industry trends and your competitors' product? Like, how do you let it affect you, and how do you complement those effects to your requirements and needs?
That is an awesome question. Literally spent last week, we had an offsite where the entire goal was just competitive analysis.
Okay.
So, yeah. I think it's a really good question. on how do you know, let me just paraphrase it so folks are clear on what that is, on how do you stay up to date on market trends and how do you keep afloat on what your competitors are doing, and then how much
Yeah.
that influence your roadmaps and your strategies.
Yeah.
So I think it's almost a full-time job. So being aware of what your competitors are doing is something
Yeah.
that you need to actively do. It's not something that's just going to happen by the way. It's one of those things you need to really carve out time and go and do. And to do that, you need to know who your competitors are. So currently, I'm working at Stripe specifically in the payout space. So for
Mm-hmm.
me, there are my top three competitors in the US and there are my top three competitors in the EU. And those are the sort of folks who I will be spending a lot of time keeping a really close eye on. And this
Mm-hmm.
could involve like public information that is available. This involves talking to users who are and consumers who are actually, oh, sorry, customers who are using both products or who are using one or the other. So it is something that you really need to be aware of. One pitfall that can come here is you try and keep track of 50 competitors, and then
Mm-hmm.
that really just is not scalable. So you need to
Yeah.
identify who are the top competitors for the specific product or the specific feature that you are currently focusing on, and you need to focus on that. So rather
Okay.
than trying to boil the ocean, just kind of narrow down that scope and just focus on that.
I mean, it's not always possible for you to have a competitive edge, right? I mean, not every day you're above your competitors or you have that edge over your competitors. There are some times where you're running out of your choices and options. How do you stabilize the whole situation then? I mean, what do you go through or how do you make sure to stabilize the situation and not have any bottlenecks in whatever you're currently doing?
So I don't think competitive research or competitors should be driving your roadmap or bringing you bottlenecks. I think
Okay.
so there's two ways of looking at it. One is there are going to be times where it is absolutely a race. So if you're looking at
Mm-hmm.
what's happening with the large learning models right now, like large language models right now, LLMs everywhere, it's become a race
Okay.
between
Okay.
ChatGPT and Bard and what Facebook is doing with Llama and all of them. Everyone is like, oh, my competitor has done this launch, I need to do this launch, and then I need to do this launch. And it's become a race because it's a very, very publicly visible thing. But these are
Yeah.
sort of red herrings. These are those once in a blue moon events that happen at that scale.
Got it.
99.9999% of the times, I can like 5, 6, 9% of the times, what you're doing is not going to be immediately and instantaneously impacted by what your competitor is doing. So it's good to know what's going on. It's good to factor that into strategy. It's good to really plan around it. But it's
Mm-hmm.
very rarely something that is so publicly visible where half the world is looking at that same specific product and you're trying to really outmatch your competitor in a short time frame. So I think the difference is that you should always respond to what your competitors are doing, but you shouldn't need
Okay.
to always react to what they're doing. And the
Okay.
difference between the two being you don't have to give an instantaneous reaction just because a competitor did something.
Okay. The timeline can just be long reaction as well.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you so much, Rohan. It was nice
Sure.
meeting you and nice talking to you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Cool.
So maybe we
Shiva.
can have a last question, Rohan.
Sure.
Just okay. Shiva, go ahead.
Hey
Do you
Rohan,
have
how are
a
you doing?
question?
Hey, I'm
Okay.
good. How are you?
Good, good. So this is based on like a experience. Like, have you ever faced a situation where you're about to release a product and like a new product, and you run into some technical issues, and there is a deadline for it? And how do you deal with those situations? Like, do you still go ahead with the release, or because let's assume that you don't know the root cause of the problem, and then how do you deal with the stakeholders or with directors or the VPs of the organization? Uh, what's the process behind that actually?
Yeah. So let me reiterate the question for folks. Basically, what happens if you find out on the day of launch that something's broken and not working the way it should work? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with your leadership chain? How do you deal with customers, etc.? So I think going back to the thing we talked about, where a release is not usually going to be a point in time thing. There's always going to be a V2 and a V2.1 and 2.2 and 2.3, etc., etc., etc. It's always going to be a bit of an iterative process. There's a lot of knobs and levers that you have. So when you're talking about release, there's so many different stages, right? Like if you're talking about like an alpha or a beta release, it's okay. People are expecting things to be sort of shoddy, sort of broken. unless it is something where your primary feature is just not working, in which case you then just delay the launch. But Apple, I think, is the greatest example of how they do this well. Historically, people have come to expect Apple events every September where they release a new iPhone and a new iOS, etc., etc., etc. And now they've phased it out into 3 different events across the year when they have different product launches. A large majority of the times at this stage, they don't have products that are ready. So what they launch and what they demo is not something that actually gets into the user's hands. There's a lot of behind the scene magic that happens, but eventually it's like, hey, we have launched this product and now you can pre-order it and you will start getting it 2 weeks from now. So you've just bought yourself 2 weeks. So Apple has really mastered the art of, hey, my product doesn't work on my launch day. How do I buy myself more time? And it's a brilliant strategy. Everybody knows what's happening. Everybody knows that the iPhone's not ready or the iOS is not ready to ship, but they've launched it technically because they had a deadline that they committed to the users. They're just not actually letting users use it. So when you're the size and scale of Apple, you can afford to do these things. Now, coming back to where the rest of the real world actually lives, when you're going to be at companies that don't have that kind of clout, what do you do? It's a tricky situation. I think it's a lot of it comes down to expectation settings. If your launch, what you're talking about is your GA, which is that you're doing a public facing general availability launch, don't launch a product that is completely broken. Like if it is absolutely where the main functionality is not working, if some edge case is not working where, hey, my feedback mechanism is inserting 3 dots at the end or whatever, it's doing something weird, funky, that's okay. But ideally, you shouldn't be in a stage where you've gone through all your different launch phases and you've reached your GA launch where your main product is not working. But for some reason, if that happens, for whatever reason that happens, it's always better to delay a launch, in my opinion, than to launch a product that just doesn't work. Because what are you launching, right? So yeah, but it's a hard one. Like it has happened. It happens from time to time where you can do everything right and then something happens on the day of your launch and everything's just a complete disaster. Yeah. And for the other part of your question on how do you deal with leadership when it comes to that, good luck, I guess. There isn't really a good answer to that. It is going to be an extremely stressful time for everybody who was a part of that project for sure. So usually what you want to do is try and not be in that situation, which is why you go through all those phases and cycles before you get to a point where you're launching it to a user. And again, if you're a 5-person startup, 10-person startup with a small product, it's very different. People expect it to be buggy and broken. If you are working at a FAANG company and you do the same thing, probably less excusable. Cool. I know we're at time, but if anyone has any last questions or parting thoughts.
Yeah. So Rohan, yeah, I know we are at the closing time, but one of my friends want to ask you a question, but he's too shy. So his question is, he wants some tips on how to crack the interviews, the PM
Cool.
interviews.
Okay. Let me talk a little about that. I think before we go into that, so whoever's feeling shy, if you're looking to get into product management, please work on that, because a significant part of your job is talking to people. So communication is a huge part of PM work. It's going to be your leadership, your stakeholders, your customers, your users, everybody. So unfortunately, PMs, whether you're an introvert or not, you don't have the luxury of being shy when you're a PM. So something to work on. But with how to crack the interview, firstly, I hate the word crack because it essentially feels like once you break it, that's the goal. I think getting past the interview is just the beginning. There's good books, especially when you're looking at early stage interviews for PMs. The most standard one, which everybody is aware of, the book that even I used when I was looking to get into PM, was Cracking the PM Interview. It's a little old at this point, but I still think the fundamentals there are solid. I've got a couple of blog posts that I've written about specifically how to do that. So maybe I can send out the link after that. But generally speaking, when it comes to product interviews, there's sort of 3 main senses that you're going to be evaluated on, especially as an early stage, early career PM, which is your product sense, your execution sense, and your analytical sense. And the fourth one, which depending on what kind of product you're working on, is a technical sense. That one I'm just going to assume people have and not harp on them. But these 3 are sort of what make you, what are things that you should prepare for any product manager interview. I'll quickly talk at a high level about them, but your product sense is how well do you understand products? Can you distinguish a good product from a bad product? Especially when we're talking to college hires, when we're talking to early career PMs, we're not looking for something crazy deep. What we're looking for is, hey, can you talk to me about a product you really love? Typically, that's what that interview is, where either I pick a product or you pick a product, and let's just really talk about it. Let's go deep. Tell me what you like about it, what you don't like about it, what can you do differently. But how good are you at judging a good product from a bad product? That's literally what product sense is. Where can you distinguish a good from a product from a great product from a bad product? The second one is execution sense. How well can you work with people to get shit done? Like that's the gist of an execution sense interview and what that really means. And these are the three things that you will use every single day, every single minute of your job as a PM. So these aren't just things that are interview specific, but these essentially are the job. These are things that you will do every day. So your execution sense is coming down to one of the key things there. How can I prioritize things? If you give me a list of 15 things and tell me you have resources to build three, how will I prioritize them? How are you able to talk to your stakeholders? Do you have the depth to go talk to them? If you need to go talk to engineering to figure out how to do this and to execute and actually build your product, are you able to do that? Do you speak the language that your engineers speak? Do you speak the language that your customers speak? Do you speak the language that marketing speaks? So that is your execution sense, your ability to actually build the product. And the third one is analytical sense, which is how good are you at making data driven decisions? So I think there's a huge misnomer when it comes to data, and everybody keeps talking about, oh, there's you have to collect a lot of data, a lot of data. If you have data, you can do this, that, and the other. The problem is not data. Data is very, very easy and cheap to get. I think the hardest thing is converting data to information. And that is where analytical sense comes in, where if you can take like a lot of raw data, which is typically very, very, very noisy, and distill it down to a very, very succinct bit of information that can help you drive your decisions, that is essentially what your analytical sense is. So any product interview, whether you're starting off as a college hire, entry level IC, or whether you're interviewing at some point in your career as the VP of product at a big company, these are the three core product management senses that get tested at every interview. So again, there's books, there's resources online, but the best way to do this is talk to people. I find the thing that helps the most, and you guys already have a club, which is awesome. Find two or three other people who are interested in product, pick arbitrary products and just jam over it. Like when you're having dinner, decide that, hey, today we want to talk about Instagram's reels or whatever. Just pick one product and just chat about it, right? Like the more conversations you have with people about these things on with these three lenses on products, you're essentially preparing for interviews. So I know I just screwed everyone's dinner conversations, but it's fun. Like if you enjoy product management, if you enjoy products, they could actually make for fun conversations over food. So I hope
Right.
that helped answer.
Yeah, so one last thing, Rohan, before we close the session. I think you wanted to get a feedback of
Yes, please.
how the session
Mhm.
went. So if anyone wants to speak about uh, the session, how it went, or do you have any suggestions for our next sessions, you are free to go. Go ahead.
Or maybe give a thumbs up if if there is nothing much.
Or a thumbs down. I don't care about the reaction, but yeah.
Awesome, we're getting some.
Okay, I see a few thumbs up.
Also, if I know I've been historically bad at this at responding to DMs on LinkedIn. Just sometimes it gets noisy, but feel free to shoot out. Just add a note over there that we chatted over here. I'll try and make sure I respond to most of them. The one caveat is I'm traveling for the next 1 week, so responses will come next weekend. But feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you have more questions that you think of later. Just shoot them there. Always happy to. May not respond right away, but I try to get to most of them. So
All right. Thank you so much, Rohan. It is thoroughly, thoroughly fun to actually talk about product and hear from industry experts like you, which is something that we don't get to see on a regular basis. There is a lot that we learn in university, but real life experience is something that we get from you and speakers like you who come and share your knowledge and experience.
thank you so much
And
for having me. Yeah.
That is lovely for us to actually hear so much. This is something that we never get. Thank you very much, Rohan, for having this session with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. And I'm really glad you guys have this club. Like, these are things I wish I had this when I was in college. We didn't, but I'm really glad you guys are doing this. So awesome job.
Thank you.
You all.
See you. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
evening.
everyone.
Bye.